symbolic of overturning this.
Are we going now? Order bearers, stand at ease.
Just in front of the in the line and everything. Thank you very much. Lord, let him repeat after his prayer. Bow once, Hugo. Bow twice, Hugo. Bow 3 times, send Hugo. I will now ask the Lord Lieutenant, Mr. Martin Wendell, to address you.
This year marks the 4th and final year of Britain's World War I centenary commemorations. During these 4 years, much homage has been paid to those who fought so bravely and selflessly to defend our nation. We have also paid tribute to those who worked tirelessly at home or behind the lines, the munitions workers, medical staff, map drawers and many more, without whom our final victory could not have been achieved. This is also true of the very many labourers brought over from India, South Africa and of course China. The Chinese Labour Corps, or CLC, consisting of almost 100,000 men from China, mostly from poor farming communities, was the largest of the labour corps recruited to help with manual work during the Great War. What they did was neither easy nor glamorous, yet it was essential. We will hear very soon about the kind of heavy physical work they carried out for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, without respite and with little complaint. Sadly, their story is little known, even to the people of Liverpool, which played host to them, albeit for a short while, as they made their way to the battlefields of Europe. But the Chinese labourers shall not remain forgotten. Theirs was a civilian army which deserves as much respect and recognition as our armies of soldiers. It is for this purpose that we are gathered here today, to remember all those who travelled thousands of miles across the continents and under the harshest conditions to help our troops on the Western Front. As the words on many of their tombstones read, theirs was a noble duty bravely done. May I at this moment declare a small personal interest. My grandfather was a junior officer on the Western Front. In 1917, one of his tasks was to organise the planting of 150,000 cabbages using a team of Chinese labour. This was a vital task for the feeding of the troops, typical of the kind of work carried out by the CLC. As Lord Lieutenant, on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, I should like to say thank you to the men of the Chinese Labour Corps. Liverpool and Merseyside will remember them. Thank you.
And now, the Right Worshipful Lord Mayor of Liverpool, Cllr Christine Banks, will take the words. Chinese Labour Corps had travelled to Europe as fast as possible to reach the front line. When it became too dangerous for them to cross the Mediterranean Sea because of German U-boats patrolling the region, they had to take more odious journey across the Pacific Ocean, overland, across Canada, over the Atlantic to Britain, and from here to northern France. Shortly after their recruit in 1917, from May of that year to April of the following year, 27 transport ships arrived on our shores here in Liverpool. Between them they carried 65,000 Chinese labourers. In other words, over 2/3 of their total force. The CLC did not stay long in Liverpool because of their passing needs to send them to Folkestone to board more ships destined for France. But Just think, 65,000 Chinese passing through Liverpool in a space of 12 months. That is a remarkable number. I wonder what would have made of our city. Many of them would have been disorientated by their long journey and bewildered by these strange people called Liverpudlians, with their even stranger accent, but they would probably have marvelled at the sight of the three places. The first true sign of a mighty Western civilization, they could not have imagined at that moment that they would soon be confronted by the horrors of the Bloody War. Chinese labourers would not pass through Liverpool again. They would not know that they would become home to one of the oldest Chinese communities in Europe. While it is good to know most of them managed to return home after the war, it is a great sadness to learn that a few thousand died and lay buried in France, Flanders and Britain, including the 5 men here in this cemetery. But to their descendants back in China, I want to assure them that Liverpool is always there, will be their home, and we are proud to count them amongst our own. They will be forever in our hearts, and we thank the Chinese community for what they did in Liverpool, England and across the world.
At the start of the war in August 1914, there was no body of men trained or designated for labour support tasks behind the front lines. Indeed, few wars prior had ever envisaged a sheer scale of effort that the first fully industrial war would demand. The British War Office therefore had to use troops for this work, primarily in the form of pioneer battalions, which were added to each division to direct, organise and complete the work that regiments of the line could not do for themselves. As the First War progressed, the need for more manpower became acute, not only to meet the huge demand for the increased use of ammunition and supplies necessitated by trench warfare, but also to manage the huge strain on transportation services. Depots, workshops, factories and ports were all desperate for manpower. The tremendous losses seen during the series of British offensives in 1915 and the Somme in 1916 meant that Labour battalions who previously worked behind the front line were now required to go to the front. Thus in 1916, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force, requested that 21,000 labourers be recruited to fill the shortages caused by casualties. However, this was insufficient to meet the need for the Great Offensive of 1917, and the British authorities considered the use of Chinese labourers to France and Belgium to add to the some 400,000 colonial labourers also recruited during the war. This was made easier after China declared war against Germany and Austria-Hungary on the 14th of August 1917. Weihai Wei Barracks in China was used as the recruiting depot, it having previously been the home of the 1st Chinese Regiment of the British Army. The Chinese regiment was in the British Army Order of Battle from 1898 until 1906. This 1,000-strong regiment was officered and led by British officers and NCOs. The Weihai Wei Depot allowed the British to recruit without restriction, and by January 1917, the 1st Battalion of the Chinese Labour Corps was ready to sail. The War Office appointed Lieutenant Colonel Brian Charles Fairfax and Major Richard Ireland Purden to organise the headquarters of the Chinese Labour Corps and the Chinese depot, as well as the native hospital at Noailles-sur-Mer. This is where the connection with the King's Liverpool Regiment began, as Fairfax was an officer in the regiment, having previously served as lieutenant in the 1st Chinese Regiment during the Boxer conflict of 1900. Purden too had served as a colour sergeant in the Chinese regiment. Fairfax was chosen to command because of his affection for Chinese troops, having been gassed and wounded during the Somme battles as commanding officer of the 17th Pals Battalion of the King's Liverpools. The Duke of Lancaster's regiment today carries on the traditions of my former regiment, the King's Regiment, and before it, the King's Liverpool Regiment. Hence my presence here as Colonel of this regiment to pay my regiment's respects to the Chinese Labour Corps. Members of the Corps, after arrival in England here in Liverpool, went to France, worked in the docks, on the railways, in transportation and storage sites, and along the lines of communication. They played a key part in ensuring the free flow of vital supplies to the armies at the front. They dug fortifications and trenches, assembled munitions, constructed ports and port facilities, carried water and supplies, and cleared battlefields of munitions, debris, and the dead. They did heavy work, loading and unloading stores and ammunition, building roads and railway. The more skilled worked in munitions factories or helped repair tanks, weapons, and vehicles. By the end of the hostilities, there were 195 Chinese labour companies in British service. The work they did was not glamorous, but it was essential war work to keep the armies fighting to eventual victory, and in itself was an extremely dangerous occupation at a number of times. They were constantly subject to artillery fire, to aerial attack, and to ground attack. Officially, around 2,000 men of the Chinese Labour Corps died during the war, although the figure may well have been much higher, perhaps as high as 20,000. Most died from the 1918 flu pandemic, but many as a direct result of enemy action or of wounds received in the course of their duties. A mere handful were recognised with the Meritorious Service Medal for exceptional bravery. They did not return to China immediately on completion of hostilities, but remained to help with battlefield ordnance clearance, an enormously dangerous task, the recovery and reburial of the dead, and the reconstruction of French and Belgian towns and villages. Thus, the contribution made by the Chinese Labour Corps was barely recognised at the end of the war. There is no tribute to them amongst Britain's 40,000 war memorials. Much of the records of their service were destroyed in the Blitz during the Second World War. These men deserve better. And our nation's promise never to forget should apply to them as to any other Allied contingent in that war to end all wars.
Can I please ask Tom Bradburn, Secretary of the Friends of Anfield Cemetery,
Lord Lieutenant, Lord Mayor, members of the military, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that a cemetery is about love and respect, but it can be more than that. Anfield Cemetery is the chosen destination of almost 600,000 people over 155 years. It's the largest geographical footprint from which to tell Liverpool's unique and remarkable history. Friends of Anfield aim is to build an international heritage and visitor centre and get Anfield's Grade 2-star cemetery off historic England's at-risk register by 2025. It will provide jobs, training and volunteer opportunities. And this has received tremendous encouragement from the Liverpool City Council, Historic England, Heritage Lottery Fund and the Architectural Heritage Fund, and funding amounting to approximately £400,000 so far. One of our Heritage Lottery Fund projects is called Lifting the Lids, the result of which will be a wheelchair-friendly heritage trail around the 141 acres here. The stories have been selected by Friends and Positive Futures, a charity helping young people, all working on a voluntary basis. The words on the boards were compiled by the young people. who will be conducting some tours from the end of September. 2 of the 13 heritage boards have already been installed. 2 of them relate to Chinese, and they are, one story relates to Su Zhenyong, our Chinese revolutionary, and is about 200 meters away. The other, of course, is to the Chinese Labour Corps, the commemoration of which we are honoured to have been asked to take part in. This story was chosen because it is so powerful, and because it faces up to the barriers of racism. Our 5 Chinese Labour Corps headstones are a testimony to one of the injustices of war. We cannot know these men, but we do know their deeds. When the world was locked in one of the bloodiest conflicts, 95,000 men from China volunteered to help Britain to do the most dangerous and horrendous tasks any nation can ask of another. No monument stands to these men to honour them. It is an injustice waiting to be corrected, a debt our nation owes. And we are here so that they shall not be forgotten.
All the descendants of the Chinese Labour Corps are back in China as far as we know. But today we're very fortunate in being joined by the descendant of a French recruit. May I please ask Karen Soo to come up and say a few words.
These 5 gravestones are a silent testimony to those young men who never made it home. They and 140,000 other young men from China came to play a significant role in the Great War and support the Allied troops, and without whom the outcome of the war could have been very different. My grandfather was one of these men, and in 1916 he stepped onto European soil for the very first time. It was the beginning of our family's life in the West, but it all began with the Great War. His name was Su Yun Yi, but he was commonly known as Su Yao. I knew him as Grampy. He left his tiny home village of Tianbungong in Toisan, Guangdong, and he travelled to Hong Kong. He was a fearless and optimistic young man. He knew little of faraway lands. There was no television, no internet, no telephone. Imagine that. The other side of the world was a mystery, as alien as the moon. He undertook the long voyage by ship from Hong Kong to France, and he made it there. Hundreds didn't. He had no choice. He could not leave, he could not return. He was 19 years old, almost a child, barely a man. He and all the other Chinese Labour Corps, risked their lives and fought to survive. My heart breaks when I imagine their fear, but it swells when I realise their courage. My grandfather was put to work on an active airfield, and his task was to keep the airfield functional. He filled in bomb craters and he kept the runway clear so that Allied planes could land. Sometimes when the Germans were bombing at the time. After the war for 2 years, he was given the dangerous and gruesome task of clearing munitions from the land to make it safe for civilians again, along with reburying the dead. In 1920, he decided to find his fortune in the West, and he boarded a ship bound for America. When the boat docked, he disembarked and he found himself in Liverpool. Well, there is some debate within the family whether he meant to or not, but I believe the magnificent sight of the Three Graces seduced him to stay in this wonderful city. He went on to open the first Chinese laundry in Birkenhead in Oxton Road at number 90. It was bombed during the Second World War, and they were moved to number 66 Oxton Road. He also helped to re-establish the CLC Association, of whom we have representatives here, in 1922. A very important part of the Chinese community in Chinatown. He married twice, and he boosted the Chinese community by having 11 children. So our family owe a great debt to Liverpool, and Liverpool welcomed my grandfather and gave him the opportunity to establish a successful business and family life in the UK. I and my family will always be grateful to the city of Liverpool and its people. We're here to remember these men and all the others that perished and those that survived. They are the Chinese heroes of the Great War. Thank you.
My Lord Lieutenant, my Lord Mayor, Regt, Mr. Cllr and Mr. Liu. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues from all professions and all backgrounds. I represent the Remembrance Society, and over the past 2 years we have been conducting a project nationwide to raise awareness amongst the general public of the Chinese Labour Corps story. It is a story that is very little known, and that's why it's so heartwarming to see so many of you here today on this day, which was very, very glum to begin with, but now seems to be shining on us finally. It's particularly heartwarming because the Chinese Labour Corps, the 5 men buried here, have been largely forgotten by most people. And that's why it's important to bring them to your attention. You have heard just now how over 96,000 men were recruited by the British Army to come over here and to proceed from here on to northern France and Flanders to help with the Allied war effort during World War I. Happily, most of them were able to return to their homes in China. But at least 2,000, probably very many more, lie in the fields of Flanders and northern France to this day. And that includes the 24 or so who are buried in Liverpool, Plymouth and Folkestone. Sadly, they have not received formal recognition for their contribution. And even more sad, they have hardly been remembered, which is why it falls to all of us to pay tribute to these men. Simple, honest, uneducated men who came to Europe in a bid to make some money, to go home and improve their livelihoods. But it does not matter that they were not soldiers fighting at the front. It does not matter that they were mere labourers. It does not matter that some of them, including these 5 here, did not even make it to the front. What does matter is that they made the conscious decision to leave their homes and their families to come all the way to Europe, to join a cause of which they knew little. And that is why it's so important for us to remember them, not only today, but for as long as we live, and hopefully for us to pass on the story to our descendants too. I will now read out the names of these 5. CLC number 7473, Guo Jingshan, who died on the 6th of June 1917, aged 26, at Port Sanitary Hospital of pulmonary tuberculosis. CLC number 34559, Sun Chensheng, who died on the 3rd of September 1917, aged 22, at Belmont Road Hospital of dysentery and syncope. CLC number 70062, Fan Chuansheng, who died on the 25th of January 1918, aged 30, at the Western General Hospital for Zachary of diarrhea. CLC number 134274, Guo Dexiang, from Linqi County, Shandong Province, who died on the 6th of July 1918 at the Belmont Road Hospital of rheumatic fever. And CLC number 131474, Liu Fengxiang, this one here, from Anqiu County, Shandong Province, who died 100 years ago yesterday on the 9th of August 1918 at Belmont Auxiliary Hospital of gastritis. We know very little about the 5 men buried here. 3 of them do not have their Chinese names engraved on the headstones. We don't even know which part of China they came from. All we do know is what we can see on their death certificates and what has been engraved on the headstones. So there's very little chance that we would ever be able to trace their descendants. And that is why Liverpool is their only home. And that's why we ask the good people of Liverpool to take them into your care. Just finally, I would like to read a few lines of a poem written by a member of the Chinese Labour Corps to his compatriots when they died in a German explosion. But before I go into that, if I could just say a few words about the end of this ceremony. After the last post and the reveille, could I please ask everyone to step back on the other side of the lane? And for finally, the people who are holding the candles, to place 2 candles in front of each grave, for everyone holding a flower, a white flower, just to place it in front of a grave in the soil. Once you leave, could you please just line up the lane over here, right up to the bend in the road, and at that point, our piper will pipe into the distance, and everyone will be able to see. If I could please ask you to do that. I'd now like to read this poem to you. The War of Europe has raged for 4 years, covering half the globe with blood. Countless heads lie on the ground, and millions have lost their lives to end this unprecedented war. Though you are dead, still you rest in our hearts. Amid the violence of war, you stood fearless in the face of danger. You sacrificed yourselves to uphold justice, so you are the true heroes of our nation. Ah, the dead lie far from us, and all we can do is to watch on in vain while we return home, leaving you on Europe's soil. Sadness is mixed with anger, and our hearts heave with emotion. Let us weep with grief. Let our tears drench our clothes as a sign of our homage to your departed souls.
Stand bearers! Shut! Carry! Standards!
shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor their years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. When you go home, tell them of us and say, we gave our tomorrow for your today.
Standard bearers, order! Stand! Standard bearers, stand out, please!
Could I please ask everyone?
And the flowers, please.